Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Mark Brennan and Daniel Gowan, and we are underway with game week number 9 of this Penn State season, which has spiraled from a number 2 national ranking to a 3-5 record here on November 3rd. We're fresh out of Terry Smith's weekly press conference, and we learned a little bit more about this team. He vocalized some of the frustrations that we have discussed here on the podcast. We had a post-game show up on Saturday. Hopefully you caught that. Daniel and I spent about 30 or 40 minutes discussing a 38-14 loss for the Nittany Lions in Columbus. It was one that was 17-14 Buckeyes at halftime. Saw some signs of fight. Thought maybe the upset alert could be brewing out there. Instead, Ohio State hits the gas pedal 21-0 the rest of the way, and a loss for the Nittany Lions, 5 consecutive, 9 straight against Ohio State. You didn't hear from Mark Brennan since then. He was out there in Columbus along with his daughter, our photographer, Grace Brennan, and Daniel Gowan. So, Mark, now that you both are back in Happy Valley, we had a chance to hear from the head coach multiple times now since the game ended. Where do you want to start? Where do you want to take the conversation? The mic's in your hand to begin this episode.
It literally is in my hand. I thought that for 30 minutes, Penn State played really well. And you got an indication again that, this team has enough talent to be successful, maybe not to beat a team like Ohio State, but clearly not as bad as a team that has lost 5 straight games. But in the second half, there just was no execution whatsoever. The thing that stuck out to me, last Wednesday, we come out of Terry Smith's scrum, and he directly said the 2 things that were going to be the most important things in the game. Number 1, out rushing Ohio State. Whatever team wins the ground game, wins the rushing battle, is going to win the game. And number 2, don't let the 2 great receivers get behind you. And they did that pretty well in the first half. There was one, Tate got behind him on one play, but you're going to take that. But then in the second half, like right off the bat, all of those things just came completely undone. So, you talked about the effort. It's there. I don't think we have to, until we see the effort's not there, let's stop applauding them for the effort, because it's good for these last 2 games. But I think moving forward, people ought to be expecting more than effort. And I get it. It was deserved. The praise was deserved the first couple games, especially given where they were going. But from here on out, enough. That second half, the way the offensive play calling, things were working for you in the first half. You were doing a great job with the ground game. You had that jumbo package that was producing really well. And then you kind of go away from it. And then the defense, I don't even know what happened with this pass rush. Excuse me. You're looking at very good pass rushers there. Deny Dennis Sutton, I just don't know. So you can blame the secondary. Yes, they shouldn't have let them get behind them, but equal blame for the pass rush. The other thing I want to say is I was really impressed by Ryan Day, because they come out and score that first. They have those 2 big passing plays to start the second half. And at that point, Sayan was hitting on 95% of his passes or something. They clearly could have passed for 1,200 yards in that game. Penn State had, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you don't have a guy go, what was he, 18 of 21 or whatever it was ultimately. That was like taking Halloween candy from a baby. They could have done that over and over and over. But guess what? They didn't. The one issue that Ohio State's been having is with the ground game and establishing the ground game. And even though it was struggling to that point, after those 2 big completions to start the second half, they relied so heavily on the ground game the rest of the way. That's what national championship contenders do. They knew that game was in hand at that point. And so now what do? Do you pile it on and then try to embarrass Jim Knowles for leaving? No. They were so far beyond that. They went to work on something else, which is the sign of a really good team. So Penn State, coming out of back-to-back games in hostile environments, very impressed with what Grunk did in terms of team management. He's got to be more accurate. And then I'll end on this. Kobe Howard makes a play for the kid. A kid makes a play for a kid. Where's everybody else making plays for this guy? I said it last week. They need other players to step up and make plays for him going forward.
Yeah, we're going to get into Kobe Howard and his situation and what's happening at receiver and what's happening with some of the offensive play calling. But Daniel, I want to offer you another opportunity. I know it's been a couple days now since we talked about the Ohio State matchup. We're going to turn the page. I know people are eager to turn the page generally on Ohio State because they're not on the schedule until 2028, and people are like, "Oh, thank God, man, we need a break from this series for a bit because it has been a hammer and nail situation instead of a rivalry." But Daniel, anything that you feel is worth discussing here at the top of the pod before we discuss what Terry Smith got into during our press conference today?
No, I think Mark did a really good job covering it there, and I think that some of the things that we'll talk about are can carry over from Saturday. I mean, I will say that when I stopped on the way in on Friday and wrote for a little bit at a Sheets in Girard, I forgot to do I was just emptying the notebook, some final thoughts, and I did forget to put the final thought of it is kind of a bummer that the series will go on pause for 2 years, just from the overall like college football side of it. I was writing up the Michigan State, Penn State kick time post, and I was scrolling through the series history, and there's something that's satisfying about seeing every year, switching locations each year, consecutive dates. I know that there's, and growing up, like it's like the helmet games. Like Penn State, Ohio State is a helmet game. You want to watch those two helmets play, no matter what the situation is. If you're a casual fan, and so I know that college football is changing. We all know it's different. Like we all know why this is happening and whatnot. But I think we can still acknowledge that from the overall, I think product. It is kind of a bummer. Like it's been kind of a bummer not having Michigan on the schedule these past 2 years, just because of we're so used to it, and it is really, I think, a fabric of college football.
Yeah, for 32 consecutive seasons, Penn State had Ohio State on the regular season schedule. A lot of back and forth over the year. The last decade and a half or so, not so much. 13 of the last 14 won by the Buckeyes. It's been 9 years since they got that win on an October night in 2016. Spearhead ended up kind of springboarding them toward a surprise Big Ten championship run. It's been 8 years since they lost by 1 point in Columbus after blowing a lead. It's been 7 years since they lost by 1 point in Beaver Stadium, and that James Franklin followed up immediately with his great to elite speech. And it's been a defining litmus test for James Franklin and now for where the program is in a state of calamity right now to start November with the most lopsided result in recent memory. So as I said, we're going to turn the page a little bit. We are going to have some key carryover, as you referenced, Daniel, because there's storylines coming out of this Ohio State matchup. And the pass game is very much in the spotlight, Mark. I went over some of the ugly statistics in our post-game podcast. I won't rehash all of them, but just put it this way. Penn State hasn't reached 150 passing yards in half of its games this season. It's reached 150 passing yards in only one of its 5 Big Ten matchups. And, of course, they're 0-5 along that way. And so, Mark, when you talk about modern football and what you envision from a team, what we just saw from Ohio State and their ability to air it out, I don't care who they're recruiting. I don't care how many star talents there are. The way they are scheming up against teams, the way you see guys do it across college football, setting things up with long distance passes, getting beyond that intermediate range. 2 passes of 20-plus yards against Ohio State. They're averaging fewer than 3 passes of 20-plus yards a game through this entire season thus far. It's maddening at this point, and I feel like Terry Smith referenced that in a bit with his press conference. He said it's kind of like a broken record where we're hearing him say week by week as the interim head coach here that they got to get more vertical. They have to push the ball down the field. It's got to be less horizontal. And lo and behold, the results against Iowa and certainly against Ohio State, they were more of the same.
Yeah, what a disconnect. Let's rewind back to last week at this time when we were discussing the fact that Terry Smith said he demanded to Andy Kotelnicki that they get more vertical. And you followed up at last Monday's press conference about that. And then Terry kind of said, well, I didn't, maybe demand wasn't the right word. It was more of well, now maybe he should demand. And he better demand, not because clearly whatever message he thought he was getting across to Andy Kotelnicki was not delivered or wasn't heard. I don't know what is going on there, but what they're attempting to do isn't working. And then to go and try to do the exact same thing, I had this in my takes afterward, and Terry referenced it today. Grunk had 105 total passing yards. Penn State had 102 yards after the catch, if the official stats were correct. Sometimes we know that they're not always like spot on, but it goes to show that they're not getting the ball down the field. You have that many yards after the catch, and you only have 145 yards. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Grunk was averaging 7.6 yards per completion. I mean, that is like, you should be averaging at least 7.6 yards per attempt. To do that per completion just makes no sense whatsoever. And once again, you have Kobe Howard. This is 2 games in a row where your freshman sees limited reps and yet still has the longest catch of the day by a wide receiver. I mean, I just don't understand any of that. So yeah, it's Groundhog Day, but Terry Smith at this point, and you guys know how much I like Terry Smith. I cover Terry Smith, but he's got to start holding Kotelnicki accountable. I mean, you want something to be done, and it's not being done. Now, did I expect Terry Smith to come out today and say, well, he didn't listen to me, and now I'm really putting – no, that would be terrible coaching. But behind the scenes, you would hope that message is getting delivered because clearly what they are doing is not working. We had Landon Tangwall on our Nitwits TV show, and I just asked him, I said, because Landon is a football guy. I mean, he's younger than us, but he obviously knows more football than most of us in the media ever will know. I mean, obviously there are some football geniuses in the media, but I said, what's the difference? And it wasn't even complicated. It's, if you don't do that, you're going to allow the safeties to come up and do what they do and, wipe out your tight end and, come up and make all these tackles. You have to keep them honest. And Penn State just is not keeping them honest. We were joking in the press box, Tyler, that maybe Kotelnicki is looking at it from the press box and he thinks vertical is going across the field from the way he's looking, because it's like, what is going on here? They know what the issue. Again, Terry Smith identified the issue and they didn't follow up and execute. So I know I went off on that, but I can't wrap my head around the fact that he said exactly what they needed to do, and then the coordinator doesn't do it. It's just odd.
Yeah, Landon Tangwall, a good friend of the podcast, by the way, as I think a lot of people know out there. And I saw he was pretty vocal and really taking it to Andy Kotelnicki in some public ways on social media.
Yeah, that's like not like media people, and I'm not dissing us. I'm not dissing anybody. But when real football people are taking you apart, I mean, that's just not that's kind of a different level to me. I don't know about you guys, but when I see former players who you respect because you know how much they know the game, that to me kind of says a lot, shouts a lot.
Daniel, Terry Smith today said, quote, "We will throw the ball downfield this week." That was kind of his punctuation mark on a bit of a longer answer regarding needing to get vertical, getting away from some of the horizontal stuff. Again, he acknowledged that he knows he has said this out loud before. And he's starting to get in that head coach seat where we've had a few press conferences now and people get a little frustrated when you hear the same thing over and over. It's not as fresh as it maybe was a week or two ago with Terry, and that's just part of the job that he faces here with the month remaining on the schedule. But what do you make of the inability to make these adjustments so far and the necessity to do it on home turf? I mean, we acknowledged a couple of weeks ago you're trying to survive the week. You're going out to Iowa City with the first-time quarterback on a primetime game. Last week, you're going on the road and facing Ohio State team that's had as good a defense as anybody in college football. Indiana is no slouch. I mean, they're the number 2 team in the country, but it almost feels like if it doesn't happen now, Andy Kotelnicki's trolling people at that stage.
Yeah, well, I think it was I said it on our pregame podcast. I think specifically, I think with Tyser Denmark and Kobe Howard, where I was like, you can say you're going to play them, you can say it, but we haven't seen it yet. And I know that the Iowa game was under different circumstances, and so I thought that maybe things would look a little different against Ohio State, and they really didn't. When Mark was talking about the contrast between Ohio State and Penn State, that got me the gears moving in my head. And I did a tiny bit of quick research. And Ethan Grunkelmeyer's average depth of target was 4.7 yards, that's really bad. And I think you might have seen when Mark was talking, if you watch my facial expression, I think you can see exactly when I saw that number. Because
I thought you were just mocking me as usual, which I deserve.
I didn't even think it would be that low. In that game, Julian Sain's depth of target was 9.7 yards. So that's a huge gulf between what they're trying to do. Yeah, I mean, I think that we just heard so much about it and haven't seen it, and it's just very hard to take things on face value when you don't see them backed up. And I mean, it's no fault to Terry Smith, and so for him to say it and us not to see it, but I think at some point you got to make those words and what we see on the field match up. I think that the things about the difficulty of the playbook, being a reason as to, maybe why some of these younger players aren't seeing the field. I think that made my ears perk up a little bit. And then, going from there, not getting vertical, when you see how you've played these first couple games, how it's working, and what you can do to maybe boost your team a little bit. I think we talked about this a little bit Saturday night. The coaching that is happening right now just feels really baffling and really tough to comprehend. I know we've mostly talked about that in the defensive sense of it, in terms of some of the different personnel and scheme things we've seen there. But on the offensive side of it, to hear that, oh yeah, it's a really tough playbook to learn, and that's why these guys aren't getting on the field. It's well, you're the coach, so you should adapt to try to get these guys onto the field. I think that in terms of development, I think that you do have to make that calculated decision. Do we want to get someone on the field who, how does it work for someone's development if we only teach them 25% of the playbook but get them on the field for it, versus we're going to wait until they know 90% of the playbook to get them on the field. I don't know. I didn't play football. I know I've seen some of these playbooks there, it's a different language. So there is I think something to weigh there, but this, from the coaching perspective, I just don't quite understand it. And especially coming out of a bye, that was the thing that, upon reflection, I think has really stood out to me, that, you had 2 weeks to prepare. You had said that you knew what some of the issues were. We saw what it looked like in Iowa, and it looked, pretty similar to what we saw at Ohio State. And so for me, I think when it comes to, some of the stuff with the passing game on offense, the coaching side of it, to me, is really, I think, confusing and tough to make sense of.
Some more stuff to get into on the passing game, but you've led me to a big picture area, because doesn't it feel like the same guys who we told were going to be the key parts of the process at every position back in the first week of August of preseason camp? Nothing's really changed there. It's these 7 offensive linemen we consider starters. We haven't really seen any other offensive linemen involved. These 3 wide receivers, the transfer players, they have a lot of experience. They're going to be tap out guys probably. There really hasn't been any of the other wide receivers involved. There hasn't been a single running back involved behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Over at linebacker, there's no trust. We saw Alex Tash get about 15 snaps. That was a step forward, and those were taken away from Dom DeLuca over the course of the matchup in Columbus. But really, through 7 games and much of this one, there's clearly no involvement from the other linebackers outside of the starting lineup. And I just think that's such a red flag on coaching and development, where you're bringing in freshman class, you're bringing up second and third year players, and you're going through all these struggles, and yet you're not trotting out anybody new. And the reason that we keep hearing is, well, Jim Knowles' defense is so very complicated, or these guys don't quite know the playbook. It's November. I mean, it is November. They've been at this since January, and they've been on the field since March. And so this is really startling to me that we've reached this point, and we just haven't really seen much of a peak on the depth chart beyond some of those guys that we knew were going to be primary components when preseason camp began. And I just want to say 9 touchdown passes in the last 9 games for Penn State on 250 total pass attempts. You look at Ohio State, and I'm going to reference them because these are two teams that came into the season top 5 considered in preseason rankings.
Top
One
3.
of these, top 3 in preseason rankings. You had one of these teams with a third-year starting quarterback, former 5-star, working with the same offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki. Of course, I'm talking about Drew Aller at QB. And you had another offense working in a new full-time offensive coordinator in Brian Hartline after Chip Kelly goes to the NFL. And your national championship winning quarterback is off in the NFL, and you're breaking in another former 5-star in Julian Sayin. Well, Sayin threw 4 touchdowns on 23 pass attempts against Penn State. He had 4 touchdowns, 3 incompletions. He's got 23 touchdown passes through an 8-0 start for Ohio State. And I'll reiterate, last 9 games, 250 total pass attempts in the 2025 modern college football era. That's what you're getting from Penn State. 9 touchdowns on 250 pass attempts over that span. It's just startling. And look, you got to look at wide receiver here, guys. They've been a part of this conversation for years, specifically the last 3 years, I think, since Marcus Higgins took things over. It's been a couple different coordinators. It's largely been the same starting quarterback until the last couple of games. But this is a group where you've had expectations going at Ohio State that we would see more of Kobe Howard and Tyseer Denmark. Terry Smith, again, he's a truth teller, and maybe this is kind of becoming a bit of a hindrance for him to be telling his truths in front of us with the microphone on. But last week, he did tell us that he expected those young receivers in Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard to have it in, kind of, what did he say? Add some energy.
Inject some life.
There it is. Inject some life. That was the actual quote into this pass game. Well, guess what you got in Columbus? You got 7 snaps for Kobe Howard. You got 1 snap from Tyseer Denmark. There was an injection there at one point, a 26-yard reception for Kobe Howard, and it's now back-to-back weeks where no one on this entire roster has a longer catch than Kobe Howard, but that's based off of just about a dozen snaps in this offense. And you go back to game 1, Mark, Nevada. Kobe Howard had 22 snaps. In the 7 games since then, he's got fewer than that. He's got 18 total snaps in the 7 games since then. And Terry Smith says, again, we're going to see more of these guys involved. You asked about Kobe Howard specifically to Terry Smith today, Mark. I followed up for a little bit more detail on both him and Tyseer Denmark, and I brought up Terry Smith's own words and what he said last week and kind of setting the stage for more use from these guys, and yet that wasn't how it went. Terry Smith referenced, quote, young guys don't know the entire playbook, so that's a challenge. You've got to do a great job of tutoring them, give them some added meeting time, get them up to speed so they're available for more. He also referenced that, quote, there's 50 different personnel groups, and there's certain guys that you want for certain plays, so you can't just plug and play. I mean, we're to the point now where it's another season that the transfer wide receivers you're bringing in are going to fall considerably short of the production they delivered at their former school. All 6 of the transfer players they have brought in at this position since Marcus Higgins took over in 2023, and you throw in Dante Cephas, Malik McClain, and Julian Fleming in that conversation, all of them either did or will finish with worse statistics than what they had at their former school. They have not been the solutions. And along the way, we have not seen homegrown talent step up. Liam Clifford has started his share of games. He's been involved in the game plan a bit more at Ohio State. But in terms of the younger talent they have brought in the last 3 cycles, 8 total players, guys, they have signed at wide receiver in the last 3 cycles since Marcus Higgins got to campus and welcomed them as freshmen. Only 43 combined Big Ten snaps for those players. There's some injuries involved, but there's not injuries involved with Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard. So it's a very hard marriage for me, Mark, where you don't have the transfers showing up and doing their thing and taking a step forward for their careers and helping your receiver room take a step forward. And at the same time, you don't have any of your young talent stepping up and saying, let me pick up some of the slack. I'm prepared. I can go out there and make plays. Maybe they are, but we don't have the trust from the staff right now. So it's hard to rectify all of this in that room. And it's such a huge component of what we have seen in the failure of this pass attack under multiple offensive coordinators.
When did Tyseer Denmark arrive on campus?
June of 2024, and then Kobe Howard showed up last January.
Right. And we're 8 games into the season, and these guys don't know the offense? I mean,
they've been here longer than Trevor Pena.
That's my point. It's like it's almost like what we were talking about with defense with Knowles, right? At what point are things so damn complicated that you're not that the coaches have to adjust, not the players. I mean, it's clearly not working what they're doing, right? So at what point do you make it that these kids can understand it? I just don't get it. I mean, on both sides of the ball. I mean, so we're to believe, and I know we're talking about the receivers, but we're to believe that Jim Knowles has this quantum physics defense that, it takes years to learn, but Matt Patricia shows up, at Ohio State, and his defense is the best in the nation, given less run up than Knowles has had.
I mean, Mark, we've got young receivers in the Big Ten at other programs across the way that Penn State kind of turned their nose at after seeing them on prospect camps. They didn't pursue them. They didn't offer them. They're out there as freshmen and second-year players putting up big numbers in passing games. And Penn State lauded their guys, and we got nothing from this young group.
So when did Jeremiah Smith show up at Ohio State?
Yeah, last year.
Right. So he's the same age as Tyser Denmark, right? I mean, and I'm not saying Tyser Denmark is the answer to all of to everything, but you can't say that young receivers, they got a blah, blah. I mean, earlier in the season, remember what the excuse was in the beginning of the season? I know I keep going back to it, but early in the season, it was because Kobe Howard didn't have things figured out on special teams. I mean, looking back at that was so ridiculous. Like, why would he need to know what to do on special teams? You're telling me you could have a really, really good receiver and you're going to hold him out just because he's not getting it on special teams. Like, what are you even going to have him doing? Like, are you having him as a blocker? Or are you having him as a gunner on special teams? You know what I mean? Like, Kobe Howard would be doing one thing on special teams, right? Returning kicks. I mean, so what wasn't he figuring out? And I know I'm going back there, but that to me, this is just all window dressing. I mean, they just messed up by not playing these guys early in the season. And I think part of it was Franklin trying to roster manage, trying to maybe sneak through this season, but with still being able to redshirt certain guys. And I said it last week, you roster manage and you roster manage until you roster manage yourself out of a job because you don't have your best players on the field. All we've heard from players and coaches, this isn't us. This is what they're telling us is how good these guys are. And guess what? Nobody has been qualifying it by saying, well, the stuff that Terry said today. And I'm not being critical of Terry because this wasn't the mess. He didn't create the mess, especially over on offense. He's trying to clean this thing up, and it's been very difficult for him to do. But, I mean, Hagen's, I just don't even – your position coach should be dictating who's playing or have a major role in who's playing and who's not playing and who's getting snaps and who's not getting snaps. And I'm just going to come out and say it right now. If you're going to tell me that you're a better team with Liam Clifford on the field than you are with Kobe Howard, given what we saw the last two games, and that's with Liam catching two passes. And I'm not anti-Liam. He's been a great kid. He's been good for the program, but you're at the point where you need to get your best players on the field. You don't need to be drawing up special packages for a guy who has one catch on the year. I mean, I know I'm going off on this, but it's so hard to understand why they're doing some of the things they're doing. And to me, especially at wide receiver, I have not been able to figure out any of it. The last time that I'm trying to think, I mean, the last time that they were really good with the deep passing game was it when Ty Howell and Jaywan Sider were calling the plays like back at Michigan State after Yurcich was, fired a couple years ago, and they were bombing it out to Amari Evans. And it's going to be interesting this week at Beaver Stadium. Like if they throw a deep pass early in the game, I'll bet you the stadium erupts, whether it's completed or not. I think everybody's just going to be like, "Oh my God, it's finally a deep pass." So yeah, I don't understand any of it, Tyler, and I'm not sure they understand any of it.
Mark, that Michigan State team that they threw all over that day, I think it was Black Friday in Detroit. That was a shell of themselves. They were approaching a new coaching staff. I don't think that team was up for the fight in any way. And then they went and played the Peach Bowl against Ole Miss, didn't complete a pass to a wide receiver until the fourth quarter. And so, especially in big games against teams with a pulse, yeah, this has been a huge issue. But I think people forget, like, we've got people being like, this has always been a problem for Penn State. Well, let me take you back to some recent Ohio State matchups, because no, it hasn't. You go back to 2019, 2018, KJ Hamler, 4 catches, 138 yards and a touchdown against Ohio State. One of those catches was a 90-plus yard touchdown that blew up Beaver Stadium in a tremendous way early against Ohio State in a whiteout game. The next year in 2019, Hamler's your leading receiver, only 3 catches for 45 yards. But if you remember, Sean Clifford didn't survive the second quarter in that game. He comes out of the game. They bring in Will Levis, who's essentially a glorified Wildcat quarterback at that stage. They lean on him and Journey Brown. 2020, though, Jahan Dotson, 8 catches for 144 yards and 3 touchdowns against Ohio State. 2021, Jahan Dotson, 11 catches, 127 yards against Ohio State. He moves on to the NFL as a first-round draft pick. Then Parker Washington in 2022 against Ohio State, 11 catches, 179 yards, a touchdown. Keandre Lambert-Smith in 2023. Now we're talking about the Higgins era at the wide receiver room. We're talking about Drew Aller being your starting quarterback at this stage. He's your leading receiver, 6 catches, 52 yards. Last year, in a game where they relatively shut down Tyler Warren, it was the least impact that he made during an All-American campaign. Harrison Wallace led the way, 2 catches, 45 yards. He also kind of got his the ball ripped out of his hands in the end zone for a key interception. And this year, 26 yards is your leading among receivers. And Kobe Howard did that on 1 catch. Devontae Ross took 5 catches to get to 26 yards. But Daniel, we've been hogging the conversation here regarding the receiver spot, how it's maybe affected things. Do you have anything to add on top of what we've said? Because you've covered the team since 2021, if I'm not mistaken. You remember what it looked like with Jahan Dotson, with Parker Washington. Mitch Tinsley was over 50 catches as their second wide receiver. Parker Washington goes down late in that season. Tinsley's a pretty key component down the road. And after that Rose Bowl, James Franklin makes a decision to part ways with Taylor Stubblefield. He brings in Marcus Higgins. They've brought in, again, 6 different transfer receivers since that time. They've brought in 8 different players out of high school. And those 8 different players out of high school are still under 100 total yards together in their careers here at Penn State.
I don't really know if I have much to say after laying it out like that. But yeah, I mean, just listening to Mark talk, I mean, it really, I think that there have been some, limitations with some of these players that they've brought in and everything. I know, like, Dante Cephas was making that leap up from the MAC. Like, Malik McClain, like, talked to someone who had covered him at Florida State, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, like he is what he is, to a certain respect. But I think with this group right now, it just goes back to coaching for me. Like, the more that I think about it and what we saw Saturday, it's like, what were you doing during the bye week besides putting in the Liam Clifford package? I think the cliche that you always hear, and it's what Penn State did after the Mike Yurcich firing. The way things were framed was like, this was really tough, but like, we're going to simplify things, go out, and just, let it rip maybe. Like, and the framing from Terry Smith has pretty much been like, we're going to keep things the same moving forward. I know that he said that the play callers are the play callers. I do think that the point that he made today where, it's not as easy as, making a coaching change, like, on your staff. Like, there are ripple effects. There are things that happen. It's not necessarily like Madden where you fire someone, then you get a new playbook immediately, and then you can go. But, it just does, make me wonder about, how they've approached this back half of the season, where I think that you got through that Iowa game. I think during the bye week, it should have been, all right, like, let's reset, let's simplify some things, and then let's just make it so that we can go. Because I know that the bowl eligibility question came up today, like, as something that, that are you playing for this? Is this a goal? Would you do this? But I think coming out of the bye, this team had national championship expectations. They're not going to make the playoff. They're not going to win a national championship. I think that you really should have, let's simplify things and let's just roll. Like, let's see what we can do. Maybe that means no jet motion from Andy Kotelnicki. Maybe that means for Jim Knowles, letting the linebackers just go, and maybe they miss an assignment and you have to figure something out. But it just felt like exactly the same at Ohio State on Saturday, and I think that is a little discouraging, I think.
Yeah, I think outside of seeing Anthony Donko replace Nolan Rucci at right tackle, getting Nick Singleton the ball in space more, which we did here during the bye week, and then seeing Liam Clifford as some kind of quasi backup quarterback gadget player that we hadn't really seen before. You're right. There wasn't a step forward,
and none of that is like surprising, really.
Yeah.
Like, because we know Donk has been the backup right tackle like this whole year, and like that was something that we've been talking about as a possibility since August, depending on how the things went out. Like, that's the thing too, where it's like, okay, like we're making these changes, but it's just been so incremental, and this is a team where it's like it's not time to be incremental. Like, it's not time to like make changes around the margins. Like, if you want to change something, like change it. Like, there's nothing left to lose, for lack of a more elegant way to frame it.
Yeah, and Terry Smith said, it's not plug and play where you take one guy off the field. These guys are in packages, and he's talking about those 3 transfer receivers who are all on senior eligibility. A week earlier during the bye week, Andy Kotelnicki said, hey, if you put Kobe Howard and Tysier Denmark on, you got to take somebody off. Again, referencing those guys. I'm not pinning this because right now the track record shows that transfer receivers who come to Penn State waste away, that they're not going to take a step forward. But Ross, Pena, and Hudson, they are all short of 300 receiving yards through 2/3 of this season. That means they are averaging fewer than 40 receiving yards. I mean, all you need is 40 receiving yards per game to get beyond 300 yards through 8 matchups. They haven't been able to do that. This offense hasn't been able to facilitate that. And it's got them in quite a quandary. Again, a familiar one, but an untenable one. And I'm sure that this is top of the list, I'd imagine, near the top of the list for Pat Kraft, because they have to reinvent that narrative at Penn State about what they are as a wide receiver developer, what they are as a wide receiver production, and that goes into the passing game with your quarterback. Right now, it's very easy to negatively recruit against this, and after that game, it's so glaring because we just got to look at the best wide receiver group in America. That's what it's been at Ohio State for a while. This group has made the case, no matter who's involved, that it's one of the worst in power conference college football. And that's a really difficult pill to swallow here at Penn State because we've seen high-level passing games against Ohio State not too far back in the rearview mirror. Speaking of that pass attack for Ohio State, came at the expense of Penn State's defensive backfield. Terry Smith said in his post-game press conference, we prioritize this all week. Don't let them get behind you. This is one of the keys to trying to win this game, and it fell apart in a significant way. A few different 50-plus yard receptions for Ohio State during this matchup. Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate had their way, put together their highlight reel. We already talked about what Julian Sain was able to do at the quarterback position. And Mark, yet again, it's like you look at all these different position groups, and is there any out there that haven't regressed or have actually lived up to our expectations coming into the season? Another guy who had the first round buzz a little bit in the preseason, AJ Harris.
No.
Well, I don't think I'm jinxing it now. I just think that you're at the point where every time they play Ohio State, it's an issue for their secondary. But this one was so particularly poor in the way that Ohio State just went bomb, bomb, bomb completion. And I know we have to give plenty of credit to those receivers. They're game changers. You put those guys on really any offense in America, maybe even Penn State's, and they're making plays like that. But Mark, how difficult is it to deal with the fact that this just happened against Ohio State, and you're turning the page toward an Indiana team that attempts to do a lot of similar stuff? Like Terry Smith said, their wide receivers, their top 2 guys, actually have more touchdowns than Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate do through this point in the season. And Indiana's got 50-plus points put up on back-to-back opponents, and there's nowhere to hide right now for them defensively.
Yeah, what's the opposite of complementary? Like, I couldn't figure out what that is. So when you have the defensive line is playing well, and then that leads to the secondary playing well, and then that leads to the linebackers, this is like the bizarro complementary football team where it's like chicken and egg. Which came first, the defensive line underachieving or the secondary underachieving? I mean, each one makes the other worse somehow. I'm not even joking about that. I mean, it's actually true. I know that sounds like a smart aleck remark, I guess, because it is, but it's true. I mean, what is leading to what? And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Nobody's stepping up. Like, nobody. I mean, I guess Zakee Wheatley, he wasn't credited with creating the fumble, but it seemed like he was the one who created the fumble, right? I had a bad angle.
Yeah.
But, he's made some plays against Oregon. He nearly made a big game-changing play that was, this close. It got overturned. So to me, he's one guy over there who's kind of living up to it. And I guess Amari Campbell is kind of, at what we expected, or maybe a little bit better. But other than that, who? I just don't know. I mean, and as you mentioned, Tyler, I mean, you're looking at last week, you're dealing with an 80% completion percentage guy. This week, you're going against a guy who's at 72% and is actually a better runner. That was the other thing in that game. I know I keep going back, but it's like the one thing that you figured Julian Sayin isn't going to do is beat you with his legs. And they get into a third and what was it?
5.
Yeah. In Ohio State territory, and you're about to make a punt for the first and what would have only been one of 2 times in the game. And I'm not saying they win that game if they hold there, but your best, who everybody thought was your best player, the guy who I picked is the guy to keep an eye on. It did end up being a guy to keep an eye on, but for the wrong reason, has Sayin lined up. What more could you have asked for than Julian Sayin on that key play? It was 10-7 at that point, I think, to have denied Dennis Sutton bearing down on him, and deny misses.
Yeah.
And then
it's been a rough go for him.
Yeah, and then somebody else misses. I forget who it was.
Wiley.
Yeah. And then he runs for 9 yards in the first down. His longest run of the season was 12 yards. So this wasn't Nico from out of Ohio State. This wasn't the kid from Iowa who, maybe isn't, the second coming of Michael Vick, but a very good mobile quarterback. And now you're going up against a guy who's even more mobile than Sayin and is also extremely accurate. And you just wonder what the answer is going to be. This team couldn't stop one-dimensional teams. This team could not stop a UCLA offense that wasn't only one-dimensional, it was one player, right? It was one player. And now you're talking about all these weapons that they have, and you're talking about a coach who Ryan Day didn't have to worry about style points. If Ohio State keeps winning, they're going to be the number 1 team. Signetti's got to worry about style points. And I'm not saying that's right, but I'm saying they are not going to get the same benefit of the doubt that Ohio State does. And if they have the opportunity to pile on points, they're not going to focus on improving their running game. They're going to focus on piling on points, I'm telling you. So this defense better get its you-know-what together before these guys arrive in Happy Valley.
The opening line for this Saturday's matchup, by the way, Indiana coming to Beaver Stadium, a 14-point favorite. That's the largest betting spread against Penn State for a home matchup since October 2016, a game I mentioned a while back here on the show when they upset Ohio State. But yeah, back-to-back weeks where you're getting buried. And I think we actually anticipated that point spread would be larger coming into the week, but 14 points as we see it right now. Daniel, I wanted to kind of get toward the finish line with this, the status of the locker room. The losses keep piling up. Got a lot of guys on this group who, again, 2022 class, seniors, they had never experienced a single back-to-back loss situation in their life. Now they're going up against the number 2 team in the country. Terry Smith was asked about where his locker room's at right now. He was asked if there would be an actual want to go play a bowl game if they were to get to those 6 wins and finish the year with 6 wins and be eligible for a bowl game. Would this locker room actually want to continue practicing together and playing together for another 3 or 4 weeks? And which I think is a very valid question that Audrey Snyder asked. Terry Smith said that, why wouldn't you want to play more football? And he thinks that this locker room would feel the same way. But are you wavering at all in your stance that this team is going to stay mentally strong based on what we have seen thus far? And do you ultimately think that the next month is really going to make them ripe for the picking when it comes to just the fan view around this team, but also what we see as a product on the field?
Yeah, I think this Saturday is going to be pretty telling beyond whether it's a 6th straight loss. I think that it's how that game goes. I know Mark said that Indiana wants to put up style points. I think for them, it's more like message points, that Indiana wants to send a message every time that they play you, and they want to break you every time that they play you. And that comes from Signetti on down. And so I think that, I did think that, like, I never felt like Penn State like got broken at Ohio State. I think there were a couple backbreaker plays, those long passes to Smith and Tate, but it never really felt like all right, like things are packed in. I think maybe in the fourth quarter when Ohio State's just running clock, like that's a little different. But I think with Indiana, they can, if Penn State is down by 3 touchdowns in the second quarter, I think that's when we know, like, okay, are these guys going to pack it in, or is there that fight that Terry Smith has been talking about and lauding? So we'll see. I mean, I think the guys that we talked to after the game out in Columbus, I didn't really get the sense that they're packing it in or anything like that. I think that there's a sense of frustration. I think that in the big picture, there's a little bit of shock for, how they ended up in this point. But, we'll see. I think the one thing that I am, curious about as we get to the stretch run is that they've talked about that. I think Terry's talked about this where, as coaches, like they need to keep coaching because they are, people are watching and the staff is going to scatter and people are going to want new jobs and you have to show that. And he said similar things with the players. And you talk about guys with their NFL stock, their portal stock, what they're putting on tape. I'm interested to see if anything breaks from that standpoint in terms of selfish play, that perspective. I think that's a dynamic that we haven't seen yet. And I think that's one that you wonder if bowl eligibility like is out of the question. And if there is a, distinct finish line on November 29th in Piscataway, do things change a little bit from that perspective? I don't think we've seen that yet. The impressions that, is that they're still playing for pride. There still are things to play for. And I think that there's also, I think, a little bit of an understanding that like you only get so many opportunities to do this. So you need to take advantage and you need to embrace that. But I think that's something that I think Terry Smith has done a good job, through these 3 weeks in terms of managing this locker room. But I think Indiana and the way that they play and the way that they try to go about things, that's when I think we're really going to see where is this team's head at.
Yeah, Penn State owns a 3-game win streak against the Hoosiers all time. They're 25-2 against Indiana. They've never lost a game in this series in Beaver Stadium. But fellas, the times have changed dramatically. Mark, we're going to get you and Daniel back on the show later this week for our final look toward that. And we'll rehash what we saw on the practice field midweek and what we heard from Terry Smith and some players. Anything you want to offer up to the podcast before we step away for now?
Yeah, I've been in that visiting team media room a lot of times after Penn State, Ohio State games. And typically, and if you remember 2 years ago, that's when Drew Aller was really, struggling emotionally. It's been guys like that. I mean, because the losses were kind of gut-wrenching. And this wasn't that. I mean, this was almost like pro athletes who are, in the midst of a difficult season, kind of doing what they need to do to get to the end of the year. I thought everybody in there, Daniel, and you end up talking to more people than I did. I was there for a few of them, but the people that I was around, including Grunk, but more so the veteran players like Zaki and Katron, really composed, not emotional, almost as if, not, I don't want to say that they expected it, but these things aren't hitting them the way losses to Ohio State did in the past for obvious reasons. I mean, it's, the season, there's not as much at stake. So if they can kind of maintain that where you're not getting super emotional, maybe you will be okay if you're able to pull yourself together. If you win this game, great. I don't think most people are expecting them to win this game, but then you have games that are very winnable down the stretch. The other thing is, I think if they were smart, they would use that 1994 season as a rallying cry for this Penn State team, because that year Penn State was undefeated, went out and won a game at Indiana 35-9. It was nowhere near that close. Joe Paterno put in all his backups and Indiana stormed back and ended up making it way closer than it really was. And that could very well have cost Penn State the national championship. And I'll go on the line and say I think it did, because Penn State fell in the national polls and ultimately never really recovered, and despite going undefeated. So if they want to, they should bring back Goon and some of those 1994 players and get these guys going. Hey, spoil Indiana season. They did it to us. Turnabout is fair play.
Well, appreciate you both. Great coverage from Columbus, from Mark and Daniel and Grace Brennan. 2 more road trips on the schedule up to East Lansing and beautiful Piscataway, New Jersey. But we're home this Saturday, back in the press box. That for the first time since James Franklin was fired. So it'll be there won't be any Fire Franklin chants in Beaver Stadium this time. We'll see how much energy is there. Yeah, I should assume nothing at this point. You're right. We'll come back with an episode in a couple days. We will have an Indiana insider on the show to talk about what has worked in their rapid ascension under Curt Cignetti and what they're bringing to Beaver Stadium. We'll also get Tyler Calvaruso back on board. And I know everyone's so excited to discuss recruiting these days. So we'll do a little bit of that on the podcast. And then Daniel and Mark will return later in the week to set the stage for this matchup. On behalf of Mark and Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks, as always, for listening or watching the Lions 24/7 podcast.